term sleeper hit means something that didn't really gain traction initially, but then suddenly took off into the stratosphere and became a big success. I'm thinking Halloween, John Carpenter, or most of his films. But today it's referring to this big chunky oak sleeper. Now, I got this for £10 from the Wood Shack in Sutton Coldfield a few weeks ago. And it's fairly heavy, it's fairly chunky, and I'm going to make a stool out of it. Now, this video is going out regardless, so however it turns out, it's going out, even if it's a disaster. So stick till the end, because I don't know how it's going to turn out. Let me bring you in and I'll show you how I'm going to slice and dice this into a usable stool. Come on. I hope that's coming up on camera. Basically, I'm going to try and take that chunk there as the seat, probably up to about there. And I'm going to take 4 legs out of here. It's going to be a seat and 4 legs. Hopefully, it will turn out simple yet beautiful, like me. So that's the plan. Wish me luck, and let's get that thicknesser out. Woo. So the usual struggle of lifting the heaviest thing in the workshop up onto the bench begun, and as there was a slight wobble in the base of the sleeper, I used some hot glue and shims to put it on this flat piece of melamine and reference a flat edge on the top. Beautiful. With the top knowingly flat, I could then feed it through and get the underside parallel to the top side. Now, I did notice that it wasn't totally square on one of the edges, so I fed the square edge next to the fence and took very slow passes through the table saw. I probably couldn't have pulled this off a few weeks ago, but since I swapped to this fried blade, not a problem now. I think 3 or 4 goes just to get that edge flat was all it took. It's probably the chunkiest thing I've ever put through the table saw, and it only goes 90mm high, and this was about 100mm, so just nipping off the end. And then I turned it around knowing that it was a right angle and did the other side to get square edges. Now, this was the bit I wasn't really looking forward to, trying to slice this 200mm width of sleeper on its edge, and as I said, the blade would only go to 90mm, so it's a case of going through as high as the blade would go on the one face, flipping it over, knowing that they were never destined to meet in the middle. There you go, just that little bit in the middle, which I set about with the pull saw in all manner of configurations. There's an old saying, if you want a hole, get a shovel. In other words, you know, some things you've just got to get done, and this was one of those. But eventually, it wasn't too bad, and I got through, knowing that I could put it through the thicknesser again. So while you're watching that, why am I making a stool? Well, the new business is having 3 distinct arms to it, and that's commissioned work, non-commissioned work and recycled work, and this falls under recycled. So there I'm just measuring and cutting it to width for an ample bottom to sit on. And as part of the reclaimed or recycled range, it's just a case of what I can get for cheap. £10 for a big chunk of oak is pretty good, and this is what I wanted to make out of it. So it's like a challenge, and I also wanted to put a lot of effort in and make a real nice piece of furniture, because sometimes lately I've been a bit rushed and I've just been knocking stuff out. But here we go with my new pillar drill, a great investment. I'm finding here about a 10-degree angle on this jig I made, because the legs will be splayed outwards and outwards. If you know what I mean. So once I found 10 degrees, I screwed that down, knowing that that wouldn't change. Then drew a straight line in the centre to where the drill would land. Squared down from the legs, then I knew every time I lined that line up and the laser on where the leg would be going, I knew each leg would be consistently in the same place and splayed outwards in both directions to the same angle. Because it's oblong, not a square, it was the only way I could think of doing it. But I was so impressed with this new pillar drill. I've ummed and ahed for years about getting one, and I'm so glad I took the plunge and got it. And as you can see, 4 25mm force and a bit drilled holes, all at a consistent angle, and that jig will stay for another day. Now here I explain how I'm going to put a little bit of a mark on the end of the legs, just so I know where the tenon needs to be cut. And I have a stop block here on the bandsaw, so I can saw down the length down to the shoulder, just to start me off. And there's a bit of missing footage where I actually run a chisel down the tenon just to shape it into a circle. But there I'm just cutting the shoulders. The shoulders will be cut again, but yeah, there we go. I had a little template to tell me when I was there or thereabouts, and then it was just a case of seeing if it would drive home. A little bit of sanding, a little bit of chiselling, paring away with a chisel, a little bit more sanding, a little bit of rasp work, and then it would slot in. And then it was the same again for all 4 legs. But I made sure I was marking up each leg with an O for outside, otherwise, so I knew which way it was facing, and a number, 1, 2, 3 or 4 seemed the obvious choices, and squared off just to make sure I had a reference, so I knew they'd be sitting square. So that's all the tenons rounded off. They all slot in. Some are a bit snugger than others. The loose ones I'm not as fussed about because it's going to be wedge tenon, there'll be glue, so it shouldn't have any gaps on the top side. I've numbered them all that you won't be able to see because it's in pencil, and I've also put an O on each leg so I know which hole it's going in and which way it's facing, and they will basically be slightly splayed that way towards camera and that way, as you can probably see. So next, obviously they are slanted and that is squared off, so the plan will be to insert each leg facing the right way as it should, and then I will intend to scribe round flush with the underneath of the stool so that they're a snug fit. So first things first, let's get these legs scribed around, and I'll show you what I mean by that anyway now. So making sure that that is at a right angle with this. If I move it this way, you can see there the lines that has to line up with. I've got the O on the outside, so I'll get each leg in position, and I will need some kind of block for the scribing. So I'll get a very thin slither. I've got a few of these offcuts. Will that work? Yeah, that looks like it'll work. So I'm going to tape this to this because I don't own a compass. So hopefully that little nib is enough, and I can just make sure that these are firmly held, and here we go. Maybe if I did the pencil at a slight angle. I don't know why you can see the line on camera. It's ironically, it's a fine line between putting too much pressure on and moving the legs and making a visible line, but I think I've done that. So as you can see, that joins up all around. So when I've done this on all four, can you see? Yeah, so there we go. When I've done this on all four legs, I will saw down, careful not to saw into the tenon because I don't really want to weaken it, and then it'll just be a little bit of chiselling again. Now, I watched a video the other day that said good joinery is done with a pencil, excellent joinery is done with a marking knife. So I gouged along the lines with a knife, paired slightly with a chisel to give a groove for the Japanese pull saw, and set about cutting all the tenons at the angle as such, with a little bit of fine tuning with a chisel again. I don't use a chisel much, and when I studied carpentry, the first ever lesson was how to sharpen your chisel. So I don't know if it still is nowadays, this was some time ago, but if it is, let me know in the comments, because that shocked me at the time. I don't know why. Anyway, here I am marking roughly where I want the rounded top. So what I'm going for is a rounding for the first 200mm, and then tapering out to more of a squared bottom, so almost as if like a pair of bell bottoms. So I use a spoke shave and a rasp and a little bit of 120 grit sandpaper, and really just shape them by eye, getting that rounded taper on the top, blossoming out into that squared off bottom, and then I'll reference them all off the first one. I'll then round over the corners of the stool with the jigsaw, just to give it a bit more shape to fit in with the rounded aesthetic of the legs. And because I was enjoying the spoke shave so much and the lack of noise, I did it as well for the seat. Now I bought these two spoke shaves, a little block plane and a rasp, for about $16.99 off Amazon, and obviously they're not the best, but really impressed for that price. So a bit of general sanding, I think I took it up to about 240, and then went round with the old flexible 400 grit pad, and then it was time to cut the relief hole and slits that would be accepting the wedge tenons. I threw together another little jig to cut these tenons out of this bit of old furniture. I don't know if it's mahogany, sapele, some kind of dark furniture wood from years ago. And there we go. So, little dry fit, just to make sure they all go in and make sure they're all sitting the right way. And yeah, so what I did, I put numbers inside the hole because obviously I've sanded them off, and tape on the bottom of all the legs so I knew which leg was going in which hole. Because they're splaying both ways, they can only really go one way, but it could get a bit confusing. And once that was done, with plenty of glue, it was time to hammer home the tenons. Now I have to remove my headphones here because I was listening for the tap of the hammer to change sound to know that the wedge was fully driven in. Just making sure the legs were sitting square to the edge. And the wedge going in forces against the grain, not with the grain, so there's no risk of it splitting along the grain, if you know what I mean. Yeah, the wedges are at a right angle to the grain, is what I'm saying. And once the wedges were driven home and dried off, I made the worst ever attempt at cutting them flush. I needn't have bothered putting the tape on there. I gauged it and all sorts, and I had to go back and sand it extensively again. But there weren't really any gaps, so it was a success. Now this jig, I have to give a shout out to Leftwich Projects, who made this jig on a stool build I was watching, and I thought, oh, it's a great way of getting all your legs level. But because of the funny angles, I had trouble clamping them. But it did all go together. Unfortunately though, I didn't get the finish shot. So here is the shot once the mineral oil has been applied. And what do you think? I really went all out on this one and tried to make it as beautiful as possible, and I was really happy. It's a nice little fireside stool or milking stool, whatever you want to call it. But let me know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.